So this is my exhibition Once Upon a Time, and this is the painting that's on the invitation card and the catalogue cover, and it's called Fairy Tale. And in many ways it was the beginning of the thought process that led me into this whole exhibition. Many of the works here were created during lockdown earlier on this year, but I was locked down with my family in the Dorset countryside. And my daughter, my 3-year-old daughter, who features at the centre of this painting, started in this period to become obsessed with fairy tales, and in particular the Disney cartoon Frozen. And she had a whole selection of princess dresses that she insisted on wearing every single day when she went for a walk with her mum in the local countryside. And it just started to give me an idea that during this anxious time, a child's ability to escape into their imagination and into fairy tales was such a powerful thing. And it began to inspire the paintings I was creating. This image is very stylized. It's got a frame around the edges that features crows, a wolf at the bottom, and irises growing up the side. And that whole concept came into my mind as a memory from my own childhood and the Russian folk tales that I remembered reading in beautiful illustrated books when I was small. So lots of different things started to become overlayered in these paintings, but the most important feature really was my daughter running through the woods as she is in the second painting here, which is called Elsa in the Woods, and escaping into her own wonderful world whilst all of us adults were fretting. So art can offer you a great escape, and for me, that's really what these paintings are intended to do. Earlier on this year, in February, I found myself in Berwickshire in southeast Scotland, and I was staying for 10 days in a wonderful place called Abbey St Bathans, in a beautiful house surrounded by ancient oak forests. And I spent my time there painting the landscape. And once again, I found that my environment was evoking all kinds of ideas of fairy tales, the forests in stories like Snow White, the forests that surround Sleeping Beauty's castle. All of this was playing on my mind as I got my oil paints out, propped up my easel, and started to create sketches of the landscape that surrounded me. It was beautiful weather sometimes, but it was absolutely freezing all the time. And when you're painting outdoors in Scotland, the environment, the temperature, the inclement weather that's approaching really affects the way that you paint. It can make you paint much faster than you would normally do. It can affect your dexterity because it's so cold that your fingers are no longer manipulating the brushes in quite the same way. And I think that in some of these sketches there's a sense of immediacy as I'm very quickly trying to come up with a solution to the problem. And this is the main painting that I created during that Berwickshire period, and it's called The Wild Wood, and it's looking out across these ancient oak woodlands which are so mysterious, so full of atmosphere, and the white adder water is trickling past, very cold, very wintry, the crows cawing in a big deep blue sky. I love this painting because it really does evoke to me the memory of that wonderful winter in Scotland. So here we have my daughter Clementine in her favourite Elsa Frozen dress. It is the made of the most appalling, shimmery, plasticky, shiny material. When I first saw her wandering around in this dress, I really thought it was a garish costume that would never, in 1,000 years, feature in one of my paintings. But because Clementine began to inhabit this character so profoundly, and because we were in Dorset at the time in this beautiful landscape in a beautiful garden, there came to be a sort of meshing of her into my environment that I felt I had to paint. So this particular work was painted over the course of many evenings in the spring of this year, and the light was so beautiful, golden and warm, and all around us the springtime blooms were flowering, but also the birds in the end of the day were calling, and it was a very idyllic moment in every day. And I would ask my daughters to come and pose for me, something which I used to have to do for my father, who was also a painter throughout my childhood, and I hated it. So the only way I could actually make my daughter stay still, I mean, she was only 3 at the time, was to embed a little iPhone in the bushes here, where she could watch Frozen as I painted her. So this is a painting which is all about reverie, and it's meant to allow our imaginations to drift off towards a kind of place of childish innocence. But the irony is that actually she's deep in the grasp of Disney, and she's enjoying this movie which she must have watched now 1,000 times. Now, whilst I was in Dorset, it was a beautiful spring and summer, so I also found myself painting the landscape and the coast, which was about 10-15 minutes from where we were living. And around about places like Burton Bradstock and West Bay are fantastic golden cliffs that fall down towards the English Channel. And it just so happened that the weather was stunning, and it was strange again because we were still in this period of uncertainty and anxiety, and there was an edge to this Summerland promise. Nobody was quite indulging in the summer pleasures with the kind of devil-may-care attitude that one might have had in the past. But still, just being able to sit in the sun, being able to hear the waves lapping on these beautiful beaches, being able to drift off into an appreciation of how beautiful life can be in the summer months was very restorative. And I hope that these paintings can offer that opportunity to be slightly rejuvenated by a memory of good times and good places as we struggle through our present difficulties. Now we're in the Arctic Circle in the far north. A couple of years ago, I went to the Lofoten Islands, which are a magical place just off the coast of northern Norway. And I spent about 10 days there sketching and painting and collecting images that I thought one day I would develop into more finished pieces like this one. It was a really extraordinary trip. And the memory of that sort of northern frozen icy land felt very appropriate as I began to push this theme of fairy tales and stories for children a little further in my own work. So the images that I kind of evolved out of that experience are using a palette that I had never explored before. So there's very cool colours, lots of white obviously, sharp blues, but also what you get in northern climes in the winter is a kind of pinkiness to the quality of the light, because there's always a tendency for the day to be young or old. You don't get a long period when the sun is high up in the sky. It always seems to be either coming or going. And that sundown quality to the light kind of really warms up some of that snow that surrounds you when you're in Norway. So that's what's infected this painting. And there's also the introduction of a little fox who's sneakily poking his way around this shed. I remember this spot really well. The whole island was pretty much deserted. And it was a sense that you were at one with nature and with the wilderness. And there was a slight quality of trepidation because the isolation felt so pronounced. And I hope that that's a kind of sensation that filters its way into these Norwegian landscapes that I've painted. Then around this particular painting, you've got a selection of still life which are meant to accompany the Norwegian landscapes. They share a similar colour palette, but for me, they also are meant to evoke a kind of a sense of iciness. So we have glass and ceramic, cool and cold surfaces that are reflecting the light and shimmering. And you have a choice of bouquets and flowers that equally, although they were all painted actually in the spring, and they are blooms that were cut in May or June, in the colour palette once again I'm trying to hark back to a slightly more controlled palette, to something that ties in with the memory of a wintry landscape. And also, I hope, in these still lives offers you a still moment of contemplation, a little journey that you can go on into these paintings, investigating the soft curvature of these objects, the gentle flower petals. Engage yourself maybe in a little reverie. This piece is called Heavy Engineering, and it's based on a lot of the work that I did in shipyards at Govan and Rosyth over the last few years. And the scene is the construction of the aircraft carrier HMS Queen Elizabeth. And what you're seeing is a kind of overlapping of multiple viewpoints. The subject that I was drawing, the hull of the ship being constructed in separate compartments, was absolutely awe-inspiring. It was massive, it was utterly dominating. And the problem I had was A, I didn't have sheets of paper big enough to squish all of this in, but B, it was so mind-bogglingly complicated with thousands, literally, of poles of scaffolding, wires, coils of tubes emerging everywhere, that to get a grip on the perspectives, the outline, the shapes that would communicate coherently to an audience what was going on was really hard. So this piece was actually created in my studio, and I used a lot of the sketches that I had done on location, as well as innumerable photographs that I had of different elements of the construction process. And this was never one coherent scene. It's actually a multiple of overlapping images, overlapping perspectives, and all of it coming together in a great sort of tangled web of lines. The real intention was not to actually give you a coherent picture of the shipbuilding process. It was to try and suggest the spectacle, the scale, the sheer complexity of what people can do when they come together to build a vessel which is 10 decks high, which weighs tens of thousands of tons, but which under the skin is this extraordinary skeleton of metal and wires. And it's a drawing that took a long time to create. There must be, God knows how many thousands of individual lines involved in creating this. But I'm very pleased with it because I really do think it communicates the great theatre of heavy engineering.